Welcome to Topic 3 in Define, Project Management Basics. The first step of project initiation is defining our problem statement. Now, a problem statement should be clear and a concise description of the problem. It should identify and specify the observed gap in performance, and by setting the current baseline and measuring the gap against customer needs. And finally, it needs to be quantifiable with metrics. Now, the problem statement should not contain any solutions or causes to the problem. One way that we can help define the problem statement is by using something called the is and is not template. Now, the is and is not template is a powerful tool that helps define the problem and gather our required information. Now, in the analysis phase, if a cause cannot describe the is and the is not data, then it's likely not the root cause of our problem. So here is an example of an is or is not template based upon a problem that we have in terms of our paper cups leaking. So if you notice in this particular table, we have two columns, is and is not. And that's on our left, we have the four W's, the what, the where, the when, and to what extent. So what is the problem? Well, there's slow leaks with the 12-ounce cups. What is not? Well, there's no visible gaps in the seams and within the styrofoam cups and the plastic cups, 16-ounce or 20-ounce paper cups. Well, where is? Well, it's at the bottom of the cup. It's at the joint of vertical seams with the bottom and less than 5 millimeters from the bottom. Well, where's not? Well, not at the 6 millimeters above the bottom and anywhere else along the bottom away from the vertical seam. Well, when is? Well, it's happening during our second shift production 2 weeks ago, 1 year ago. It's not at the first shift production between 11 months ago and 3 weeks ago. Well, to what extent is it? Well, 10% of our production overall, 20 to 30% on the second shift, and there's a drip rate in within a 30-minute time frame. Well, where's it not? Well, the same extent on both shifts, all the time, barely noticeable, within 1 minute, or immediately obvious within 60 plus minutes. So a project objectives must meet what they call SMART criteria. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based, and stretch. Now the first S, specific, means that the project deliverables should be specific. And when it comes to measurable, the project objectives should be quantifiable. The project objectives should also be achievable and practical. And also the objectives should be relevant to our problem. With time-based, this is where the project objectives must specify a time frame within which they should be delivered. And then finally, with our stretch goals, the project objectives must not be easily achievable. Project documentation includes documents that provide details about the project, as well as helping to gain a better understanding of the project, to prevent and resolve conflict among stakeholders, and to share plans and status for the project. The benefits of having proper project documentation is going to help teams achieve a common understanding of the requirements and the status of the project. It also helps to remove any personal bias that there may be in the documentation history, especially during discussions and decisions that are made for the project. So some examples should include the project charter, the project plan, any key milestone reports, any risk item lists, and pending action lists, and finally, the final project report. Now, a project charter is a written document that defines a team's mission, scope of operation, objectives, timeframes, and consequences for the project. It is a formal approval from senior management to start the project, and a project charter should always include measurable objectives to be achieved from the project, organizational and operational boundaries of the project, and the top management support and commitment. Now here's the steps to complete a project charter. So the steps to start writing a project charter begins by the green belt who writes the problem statement and the project charter. That project charter is then reviewed by a black belt and then the black belt is then responsible to get the champion's approval for the charter. Some of the major sections that as a green belt or a black belt we're going to be required to have in our charter would be the project name and description, the business need, which would be our problem statement, the project manager's name, the project purpose or justification, including any return on investment. So why are we doing the project and what's the purpose or justification we're going to get out of it? The stakeholder requirements, any broad timelines, major deliverables that we could deliver during the project, any constraints and assumptions to the project, and some sort of budget summary. Now, a project plan is the final approved document which is used to manage and control the various processes within a project and ensure seamless project execution. The project manager uses the project charter as an input to create a detailed project plan. Now, some of the major sections of a project charter, which would be as follows: the project management approach and scope statement, any work breakdown structure, or what we call WBS, any cost estimates and schedules, performance baselines and major milestones of the project, any key or required staff that is needed, as well as open or pending decisions, and then finally, any key risks that could be obtained during the project. So project scope refers to all of the work involved in creating the products of the project, as well as the processes used to create them. Now, project boundaries are developed and reviewed to ensure that the project adds value to the customer. Now, with scope planning, we're going to define and verify the controlled project scope. We're going to review the project charter, and we're going to divide the project into smaller milestones. And then we're going to receive the acceptance of the project scope, and then we're going to control changes to our project scope. So what we have here is a great tool that I use to actually teach scope. Now, I use this with every client, and I use this in every project that I'm on. And so it's just on a simple whiteboard, and what I've done is I've just drawn two boxes. I draw a box for what we're going to consider in scope, and I draw a box for whatever we can't decide on. Outside the box is what we're going to consider to be out of scope. Now, here on the left-hand side, we have numbers 1 through 5. And these represent items that we might talk about on our project team in terms of what's going to be in scope and out of scope. So typically what I do during the facilitation of this discussion is the team will then have a list of Post-it notes. They'll come up to the board and they will start putting their Post-it notes wherever they want in terms of what they consider in scope and what they consider out of scope. So here we've placed 3 of our Post-it notes in what we consider as a project team to be in scope. And then we have 2 items that we consider to be out of scope. Now, what's going to happen is during this conversation, let's say that we start having a conversation on whether or not item number 1 really is out of scope. Maybe you think that the item number 1 needs to be in scope. And so we have a very nice and healthy conversation about that. But during our conversation, what we're going to have to do is take this item and put this in the question mark. Now, let's say that we're looking at our in-scope items, and I disagree with your decision to put item number 4 in scope. I think item number 4 doesn't need to be in scope, or if it does need to be in scope, it doesn't really have to be. And so during our conversations, we might be moving that to our question mark box. At the end of this conversation, we look at the fact that both items 3 and 5 are going to remain in scope for our project. And we've all agreed unanimously to keep item number 2 out of scope. But now comes the questions about items number 1 and items number 4. What do we do with those? Because some of us agree that they need to be in scope, and some of us agree that they need to be out of scope. So in this particular case, we have our conversation and we decide that number 4 does indeed need to be in scope, and number 1 does indeed need to be out of scope. Now, the great thing about having this conversation is that during the idea generation, and especially during the conversation, we've all come to an agreement And when we all agree on what is in scope and we all agree on what's out of scope, it's really difficult to have something called scope creep. Now, scope creep would happen if in the event that, let's say, we had another one way out here that our supervisor, our manager, or our champion has decided that they now want to add another item to our scope once we've already decided. And in this particular case, we will then have to decide whether it's in scope or whether it's out of scope. Scope creep, what it's going to do is it's going to do one of three things. It's going to require that we need additional time to complete our project. It's going to require additional resources or money to complete our project. Or it's going to require us to reevaluate the entire scope of our project. If any one of those three things don't align with the other two, it's called scope creep. So this is a great example on how we can use a really simple tool such as a whiteboard in 2 boxes to have a really healthy conversation around scope.